All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm Jeanne Hecht. I'm excited to be here talking to you this afternoon. I'm the CEO Chairwoman of the board for Lexitas. I've spent over 25 years in the life sciences industry, in clinical development, commercial services, as well as advisory. Spent a little bit of my time in academia helping the folks at UNC Kenan-Flagler, as well as Wake Forest, create a master's in clinical research. I'm very excited today to be joined by you, many of my esteemed colleagues here in the life sciences, venture capital, private equity, and adjacent industries that are all working hard to help bring new and novel ophthalmic discoveries to market to serve those patients that we strive every day to help. I am honored to be accompanied by Dr. David Tanzer, who's the Chief Medical Officer, working alongside me at Lexitas. He's a board-certified ophthalmologist with more than 25 years of clinical development expertise and leadership in launching a number of really interesting and novel products in the cataract and refractive surgery and consumer eye health. He's worked as principal or co-investigator in more than 90 clinical studies, and his work has helped to advance many therapies in dry eye, presbyopia, macular degeneration, rare inherited retinal diseases, and much more. You'll see on this, during this webinar, there's a comment section, so please feel free to raise any questions for Dave or I in that field, and we'll do our best to answer those after we've gone through our prepared remarks. So let's go ahead and dive in. The ophthalmology sector as a whole is strong and resilient. And today we're talking about our insights for ophthalmic investors and those of you that support ophthalmic investors. The reason why it's resilient is because of its increase in prevalence and awareness of ophthalmic diseases. Each day we work to advance and develop new products, and that's seen across the team at Lexitas and across the entire industry. We're looking to advance new products of novel therapies, novel mechanisms of action, and that's driving investment dollars, as well as the commercialization of those assets are creating a really healthy ecosystem for new investments to percolate. There's over 20 million adults with retinal disease and over 2 million adults in the United States with significant visual impairments. What's been really interesting and fantastic to see is that the ophthalmology biotech indices has been outperforming the overall biotech indices, which shows that it's a very rich area to continue to place investment dollars. With 38 billion pharmaceutical development market, drug market, with many marquee companies, it continues to grow and be strong. On the next slide, you'll see that I have some interesting information from Outcome Capital for one of their recent reports. And what shows is that the market is stabilizing. And I know that there's probably a lot of questions about how is the current administration impacting any stabilization in the market, or how is artificial intelligence and the dollars that are often getting diverted to those technologies disrupting or potentially challenging the market. But what we're seeing in ophthalmology is a continued stabilization of the market and continued investment in some very interesting and novel products. I saw a great report yesterday from Evercore that showed that 3.8% year-over-year increase in R&D spending as a whole across the entire and all therapeutic areas for pharma R&D spending. And that's extremely nice to see. And we've also seen kind of from a quarter-over-quarter perspective in the entire biotech industry an increase of about 180%, while year-to-date it is still down compared to prior year. The ophthalmology projections, as you can see, is continuing to increase, and we anticipate that the 25 as a whole will continue to show marginal improvements over 2024. If you go on to the next slide, the reason why it continues to remain strong in some of the dollars, there were 13 transactions that represented $620 million in quarter two. Dollars are down from quarter two of 24, but even yesterday there was another announcement, and this morning of another $11 million seed investment for a cell and gene therapy coming into the ophthalmology space. You'll see too that a lot of the investment dollars are going towards more later stage assets versus early stage and seed stage funding. So we are seeing more commercial ready assets receive additional equity infusions when compared to later stage assets that are getting more than when compared to early stage assets. I'm very optimistic about the industry as a whole, but that optimism is cautious. When you go to the next slide, you'll see that the growth trends in ophthalmology trials is also up year over year through 2024. And clinical trial success rates is slightly higher in the ophthalmic space when compared to all other therapeutic areas outside of oncology. So we're seeing an overall likelihood in clinical trial success kind of from proof of concept through to commercialization of about 10 to 15% from phase 1 through FDA approval. In the ophthalmology space, we're working really hard, and Dave will talk about that a little bit later. As an industry, we are working hard, and as Lexitas, we're working hard to advance novel endpoints to continue to potentially improve those success rates as we work to bring new medicines to patients. On the next slide, you'll see that from a trial start, dry eye disease, age-related macular degeneration, as well as GA are the largest contributors to clinical trials. And that is also where a lot of investment dollars have gone into the polypharmacy approach for dry eye disease. We see about 13.9% of clinical trial starts are dry eye disease. This is for early stage phase 1, phase 2, US or small global trials. The same thing is true for age-related macular degeneration and geographic atrophy. So the market continues to be quite rich as it relates to new products coming out to the research centers and to potentially providing clinical research as a care option for patients who are looking for alternative solutions. And we'll continue to watch the market, but I wanted to share with you this information that came from global data. I have the honor now of passing the baton over to Dave to go through a deeper dive and double click on some of the materials that I just walked through.
Great. Thank you, Jeannie. My pleasure. So it's amazing to me, being in ophthalmology for over 30 years now, that we've managed to carve up a space as small as the diameter of a quarter into 7 or 8 different subspecialties. But for purposes here, we're going to carve it up into just the anterior segment and the posterior segment, and talk about what's new, hot, and interesting in ophthalmic drug and device development. Leading in the anterior segment space, myopia or nearsightedness. It's amazing that it's going to reach a global prevalence of over 5 billion people worldwide in just 25 years. And we know that through many studies that the more nearsighted somebody is, the higher the risk is for things like cataract, glaucoma, macular degeneration. So if we can do something to stem the tide of myopia, we're doing a service globally. We're talking about billions and billions of patients, potentially worldwide. Dry eye, as Jeannie mentioned, is still a hot area of ophthalmic drug development, but it isn't something as simple as just putting a wetting drop on the eye just to soothe the signs and symptoms. It's really about disease modification, understanding why that patient has dry eye, whether it's inflammatory, whether it's infectious, whether it's autoimmune. Understanding the source and the cause of dry eye, and then targeting the therapies appropriately. It's really a disease modification as opposed to just masking signs and symptoms. Something near and dear to my heart as a cornea transplant specialist by training, Fuchs endothelial dystrophy is something that's hot in the anterior segment space. We're born with a certain number of endothelial cells in the cornea, and they just start to lose or die as we get older. And if you lose too many, the pumping mechanism doesn't keep up, and patients ultimately may need surgical intervention. Well, wouldn't it be nice if we can modify this disease, perhaps through cell and gene therapy, as is being done now? So again, a hot area of ophthalmic drug development in the anterior segment space is cell and gene therapy approaches to things like Fuchs dystrophy to reduce the need for surgery. Presbyopia, something that we will all suffer from sooner rather than later, me included, is something that's a hot area of ophthalmic drug development. It's specifically the pupil modulation from a drug development perspective, and from a device perspective, novel Intraocular lenses that give extended depth of focus or multifocality, very hot area in how we manage presbyopia, or literally aging eye. And glaucoma is still a very hot area in the anterior segment space, not just about lowering the intraocular pressure, which of course is important, but also about neuroprotection, actually protecting the back of the eye, protecting the retinal ganglion cells from further degeneration, or perhaps even reversing some loss of the retinal ganglion cells, and perhaps even restoring some vision loss in these patients who otherwise will go on to develop potential blindness. Transitioning to the posterior segment space, the tyrosine kinase inhibitors and bi and trispecific small antibodies are novel ways we can treat the bread and butter diseases like neovascular AMD or diabetic macular edema, and perhaps extending the durability through novel mechanisms of action. Jeanne mentioned geographic atrophy and the precursor to that, which is intermediate AMD, a very hot area. Right now in the US, we have two different therapies that are approved. Both of them require intravitreal injections month over month, year over year. This is a hot area of drug development in terms of gene therapy approaches. Inherited retinal diseases, smaller numbers, but they're just devastating when patients get them. Retinitis pigmentosa, Stargardt's, for example. In fact, the group here may be aware that gene therapy approaches to medicine got its the first indication for a gene therapeutic approach was actually in ophthalmology for Leber's congenital amaurosis. That was about 10 years or so ago, the Luxturna approval, and a lot of innovation has transpired since. We'll get into a little bit more specifics about the endpoints that are required for something like inherited retinal diseases, but again, a hot area of posterior segment drug development. Drug delivery is something that's hot right now. Most of these therapies are requiring repeated intravitreal injections. Wouldn't it be nice if we could do something non-invasively, like oral therapies, extended drug delivery, topical drops, and things like that? So how we deliver drugs to the eye is something that's a hot area of development. And finally, I've mentioned cell and gene therapy. You'll see this theme repeated. The potential for one-and-done therapies for the bread and butter like AMD or DME, but as well as retinal inherited diseases, the IRDs, is something that's very, very hot in ophthalmology. On the next slide, we'll see the progress and development that we were certainly a part of. We're proud at Lexitas to be a part of various consortia that bring together patients first and foremost, but also regulators and payers, drug developers, industry representatives, clinician scientists, and we have a seat at the table to discuss what's important for patients and what's important for regulators and payers, and ultimately then talk about novel endpoints. And we can bring that insight back to the companies that we support and sponsor, and then are able to create and help to guide and develop the best clinical development program with the end in mind, ultimately what's going to be approved and reimbursed, but also with the patients in mind, what's important for patients. I mentioned anatomical endpoints, functional endpoints, a very hot area. Case example here is geographic atrophy. As I mentioned, there are two different therapeutic approaches approved in the United States for geographic atrophy. Both of them got their approval based on anatomy alone, reducing the progression of retinal loss. Unfortunately, those endpoints weren't good enough, if you will, for the European Medicine Agency. So these are not approved actually in the European Union. They're looking for more of a functional benefit for geographic atrophy. So this is again, the conversation that we have both in the US as well as abroad, what's important for regulators and payers from a functional and anatomic perspective. And again, these insights we bring back to the sponsors that we serve to make the development program as good as it can be. Finally, the use of AI permeates our lives. Certainly, drug development's no exception. We're utilizing that at Lexitas, starting with investigator database mining, finding these patients where they exist in current databases from an AI perspective, and help to accelerate enrollment, recruitment and enrollment. We use AI in many different ways to adjudicate primary endpoints in various diseases. We use AI for expanded labeling, such as phase 4 studies. And finally, real-world evidence and big data analytics. AI can be utilized for analysis of these large data sets for various purposes. The next slide, we'll see focus of innovation here in the retina space. Again, the retina continues to be, in my estimation, the most dynamic and innovative space in all of medicine, starting with the strategics. The heavies in this space continue to focus on the bread and butter in indications like neovascular AMD and diabetic macular edema. In terms of extended durability, that seems to be their battleground currently. The one exception to that is when AbbVie picked up REGENXBIO a couple of years back. REGENXBIO, as the team may be aware of, is focused on genetic therapeutic approaches for the bread and butter indications like wet AMD and DR-DME. That seems to be the exception to the rule here, but the strategics are focused on the bread and butter indications, whereas the small and mid-sized companies are more focused on the high risk, high reward of being truly innovative and finding novel mechanisms of action. I've mentioned cell and gene therapy for retinal inherited diseases. You see the list here. These are all novel approaches for devastating diseases such as retinitis pigmentosa and Stargardt's. There are a couple of exceptions to that rule. Gene therapeutic approaches for the bread and butter, 4DMT and Adverum are looking at intraretinal injections, or I should say intravitreal injections for the bread and butter of wet AMD and DME. Again, a gene therapeutic approach for the bread and butter indications taken by small companies looking to innovate here in this dynamic space. Trends in cell and gene therapy, a lot of focus is being given to the right dosing intervals and the right techniques to deliver the medications to the eye, whether it's intraretinal, intravitreal, I should say subretinal, intravitreal, or suprachoroidal. We want to make sure we get the right doses appropriately to mitigate the potential side effects of inflammation, making sure it's the safest approach to patients, but also the most effective. Long-term follow-up requirements. This is something that we have not seen before. The regulators and even the payers are expecting data sets to go out 5, 10, even 15 years to see that whether or not the effect we're having is truly long-lasting, and the safety profile is what we need it to be for patients as well. Finally, patients are becoming much more well-educated and informed about their treatment options. And when you look at something like an inherited retinal disease, where the only choice is going blind, there really are no other innovative therapies other than cell and gene therapy. My point is that patients are becoming much more involved in that decision-making process, and informed consent is, of course, very important for something like a cell and gene therapy for inherited retinal disease. The next slide, we'll talk a little bit about common pathways in ophthalmic development, some of the pitfalls that we are aware of, and we, of course, help to avoid by facilitating these studies on behalf of our sponsors. I mentioned the appropriate study design and endpoints. Again, we bring the insights back from the consortia that we are a part of, and help to develop the right approach to the development program that meets the specifications of our sponsors, as well as the investors that are investing in these companies. We also are cognizant of the site and investigator challenges and also competition in the space. I harken back to geographic atrophy. There is a lot of innovation going on in geographic atrophy. We want to make sure we're selecting the right sites with the right investigators, and not competing for the same patients at those individual sites. So again, it becomes site relationship driven. We have great relationships with the sites, both the anterior and posterior segment space, so we're selecting sites appropriately, customizing that approach for the sponsors that we serve. In terms of patient recruitment and retention, so there's a host of ways that we can recruit quickly, most effectively, and then retain those patients throughout the study. Again, cell and gene therapy tends to go out to at least 2 years, and now even longer. We want to make sure we retain those patients appropriately, and there are novel ways to do that, not the least of which is incorporating AI into those strategies. And finally, I mentioned regulatory and strategic missteps and understanding what's important from a regulatory perspective and also a payer perspective, and inserting those insights into the right clinical design and protocol, so we get it right the first time and the investment is well spent. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about some lessons learned in drug and device development along the way, because from my 30 years of experience, but also Lexitas' 15 years of experience in this space as well. First of all, again, aligning endpoints with the regulatory and payer needs and the real world expectations how we're helping to take care of patients. In terms of setting realistic expectations and keeping the patient centric in this entire process, that's critically important. And it starts with these consortia, keeping the patient expectations foremost in mind. And we are developing the programs, understanding the burden that some of these patients have to endure when they enter into clinical development programs, making sure that it's the right balance between getting our endpoints that we need from a regulatory and a payer perspective, but also understanding that sometimes enrolling into studies is burdensome on patients and their families. I mentioned our strong partner relationships with the sites that we help recruit and incorporate into these studies, getting the right sites involved with the right investigators so that the studies are done on time, on target, and the investment is well spent, and the expectations are met by the sponsor as well as the investors. Ensuring imaging and data integrity from day one, that's table stakes for a company like ours. We want to make sure that the data that we are accumulating is done appropriately and there's no issues when the study is locked and the data is integrated appropriately, and we have that perspective from day one. Finally, as I mentioned, keeping the patients foremost in mind when we design our clinical trials and protocols, understanding that it may be onerous for a patient who has this ophthalmic disease to enter into a study. We also need to get the right endpoints from a regulatory and a payer perspective, but keeping that whole milieu in mind, but keeping the patient-centric in everything that we do. With that, I'll pass the baton back over to Jeanne, and she'll tell you why Lexitas is the best at what we do in the ophthalmic space. Jeanne?
All right, thanks. Great job, Dave. Yeah, I'm proud of the work that the team at Lexitas does. I'm proud of the expertise that we've amassed over the last 15 years in the anterior segment and posterior segment. As an organization, we originated and focused initially on the anterior segment until about 2018, when we really started to double down, and as the industry started to invest in new assets in the posterior segment. So you can see our numbers here. This is the typical statistics chart that people always ask about us with our product approvals, as well as the number of different trials that we've run both domestically and abroad. You know, if you happen to be at AAO, at OIS, at the Mary Tyler Moore Vision Initiative, you know, Dave and I'll be at all three, and we'd love to talk with you one-on-one. And on the next slide, what you'll see is experience about how we help both early stage companies and investors, be that in market assessment, diligence support. So I've seen a number of diligence exercises go awry where non-ophthalmic experts were requested to weigh in on ophthalmic products and development pathways. Please don't make the same mistake as some of those organizations have made. If you want assistance with endpoint planning or protocol writing, and or to help build out a scientific advisory board or committee, we'd be honored to be your partner, as well as to be your partner in the design and execution of your clinical trial or that of the companies in which you invest in. I know we have a couple questions listed in the chat, and so one of the questions is about what are the success rates. I had mentioned those earlier in my presentation, but let me take a step deeper into what those success rates are. When you look at the overall ophthalmic development industry, the success rates are between 10 and 15%, and that's from phase 1 to FDA approval. And then when you look at it from the success rate in the anterior segment or the posterior segment. So I'll start first with the posterior segment. It's the 10 to 15%. When you get to the anterior segment, the success rates go up a little bit higher, in 12 to 18%. That obviously varies on the success from phase 1 to phase 2, where you tend to have a higher success rate. You tend to see more products drop out in the phase 2 to phase 3 stages. And then you see an uptick back and again from phase 3 to approval, where you see a number of products, the success rate increase in a number more products making it over that hurdle from a phase 3 to approval, where it gets to about 60% in the phase 3 to approval as compared to in the phase 2 to phase 3, about a 30 to 35% success rate. Dave, there's a question here for you, which are, what are the key factors VCs and private equity should use when evaluating and assessing an ophthalmic asset?
Sure. Thanks, Jeannie. Yeah. So, depending on your risk tolerance, I guess from my perspective, does the asset truly address an unmet need? Does it tackle an existing need in a novel way, through a novel mechanism of action? Or is it more of a me too? Again, case example would be the anti-VEGFs for neovascular AMD, and the durability play is sort of a me too, but looking to extend durability. I would say let the preclinical data be your guide in assessing the mechanism of action, how it's delivered, and also the target indication or indications. Are there multiple shots on goal from what this new ophthalmic therapy could provide? Neovascular AMD and diabetic macular edema (DR) and RVO. So does it have that broadness of potential indications, which would be certainly an advantage. Finally, I would say assess the team for experience, their passion for drug innovation, the risk tolerance, of course, and of course a proven track record of success doesn't hurt. Thanks.
And maybe one more question for you, Dave, before I wrap up. What strategic missteps do you often see in ophthalmic development planning?
Yeah, thanks, Jeannie. I would say first and foremost, as you alluded to, drug development is hard. I mean, we average about a 15% success rate across the indications in ophthalmology. So clearly, more shots are miss the net than hit the goal, I guess would be the analogy there. But so selecting the best preclinical models for the given mechanism of action is important. Getting the right mechanism or method of delivery is important. And as I said earlier, the indications, the more broad, the better. And then ensuring translatability to the human system would be obviously a good approach. You want to make sure that the preclinical modeling that you're using initially is translatable to the human system. But that, of course, takes investment up front. But again, the more de-risked you are in the preclinical and the early development phases, the more money you may save on the back end. So, so de-risking up front is of course important. Sometimes that means going all the way to using non-human primates in the preclinical model. And if that's appropriate for your specific therapeutic and mechanism of action, then that may be what you need. Especially if the mechanism of action is truly novel. Trust me, I've learned that lesson the hard way. And sometimes that's what it takes to de-risk your program going forward. Thank you.
Awesome. Fantastic. I see one more question. Obviously, the patient's at the center. So what advice would you have to ensuring you get the patient impact is really measured and included in study design?
I'm happy to take that.
Yeah.
I would say, the team here is probably aware of the importance of patient-reported outcomes as we develop our clinical trials. This is something that's really gotten a lot of, it's elevated in terms of its importance over the last 10 to 12 years. And PROs, patient-reported outcomes, are now part of all of the clinical trial designs that we factor in. So getting the voice of the patient up front, as I mentioned, through those consortia, so we know what's important for patients as we design our clinical trials, but also then capturing their feedback through the clinical trial process through patient-reported outcomes. It's become integral in all of our clinical trial designs.
And I'm going to just add on to one other thing, because I think that we appreciate their input as the study coordinators and the PIs and the key opinion leaders, and leveraging, especially the study coordinators who deal a lot with both the complex and the mundane as it relates to the patient care when they're going through a clinical trial. They often hear a lot. And so we have a study coordinator advisory board that we lean into, and we leverage the insights from them as well, in understanding overall the field and what are some of the challenges that they see within their clinics and within delivering the best possible patient care for them on a clinical trial. So I would say, additional to what Dave shared, that's what I would like to add. Great question. Very good question. I want to thank everyone. I promise to keep this on time. We're at the end of our 30 minutes. I know that calendars are stretched, and so as a result, I want to be respectful and want to just thank you very much for your time and attendance and interest, and would love to hear from you. So please reach out to either Dave or myself. Would love to hear from you on future topics, even that you'd like for Dave and I to explore and share in a conversation with us. So thank you all. Thanks for all the work that you're doing to change the way people see the world. It's very meaningful, and I'm glad to be your partner in it. Thank you. All right.